श्रीवत्सवंशकलशोदधिकौस्तुभस्य श्रीवासराघवगुरोस्तनयं ततश्च विद्या अवाप्य विबुधोत्तमतां दधानं कुर्वे सदा हृदि गुरुं करुणाकराख्यं लक्ष्मीनाथसमारम्भां नाथयामुनमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्परां यो नित्यमच्युतपदाम्बुजयुग्मरुक्मव्यामोहतस्तदितराणि तृणाय मेने अस्मद्गुरोर्भगवतोऽस्य दयैकसिन्धोर्रामानुजस्य चरणौ शरणं प्रपद्ये मातापिता युवतयस्तनया विभूतिः सर्वं यदेव नियमेन मदन्वयानाम् आद्यस्य नः कुलपतेर्बकुलाभिरामं श्रीमत्तदङ्घ्रियुगलं प्रणमामि मूर्ध्ना भूतं सरश्च महदाह्वय भट्टनाथ श्रीभक्तिसारकुलशेखरयोगिवाहान् भक्ताङ्घ्रिरेणुपरकालयतीन्द्रमिश्रान् श्रीमत्पराङ्कुशमुनिं प्रणतोऽस्मि नित्यम् श्रीमान् वेङ्कटनाथार्यः कवितार्किककेसरी वेदान्ताचार्यवर्यो मे सन्निधत्तां सदा हृदि. We were seeing the story of Tiruppalalvar in the previous lecture. Now, let us return to some theory. Core theory. Tattvas in Vishishtadvaitha. In this context, how are we to understand the word tattva? Tattva is that which needs to be known. Sorry. Tattva is that which should be known properly. Now this tattva is classified in different ways. One method of classification is what we have already seen. Classification into three types. We saw tattvatraya, where we said one is jada or achit. One is jiva or chit. And one is Ishvara. So that is a way of classification where we have three types of tattvas: Chit, Achit, and Ishvara. But there are some other ways of classifying as well. If we go to the Tarkikas, let us open their basic book, Tarka Sangraha. There we can see there is a word called Padartha, referring to entities. Not entities as such. Dravya would be the entity. Padartha is divided into 7 different types: Dravya, Guna, Karma, Samanya, Vishesha, Samavaya, and Abhava. These are called Sapta Padarthas. Padartha is basically just something that has a name. It is a pada that has an artha. So, what are the different types of padarthas? They said, the Nayayikas, they said, there is Dravya, call it substance, entity. Then Guna, quality. Then Karma, action. Samanya, generality. Vishesha, particularity. Samavaya, that is intimate relation. And finally, Abhava, that is negation, the absence of existence. They said these are the 7 types of padarthas. Now, in Vishishtadvaita, we did not start with That way, right, we started with the word tattva, and therefore we are using a different way of classification. Okay, but what about the two types of tattva? On the slide, the seven types, as explained by Tarkikas, has been discussed. Three types that we have already discussed before, Tattvatraya. In fact, there is a chapter in Rahasya Trayasara called Tattvatraya Chintana Adhikara. We have seen about Tattvatraya in detail before. Then how could there be just two types of Tattva? It's very simple. We are classifying it in a different way. What would be the two types of Tattva then? One type is Dravya. Remember, in the seven types we said the first type is Dravya. So when we say there are two types of Tattva, the first type is Dravya. The second type is Adravya, that which is not Adravya. Now, this Adravya is of 10 different types. Dravya is entity. What could be a non-entity? Guna, for example, property. Consider color. Consider taste. These are not entities. You cannot call them as dravyas. So they will be classified as adravya. The other category, that of the entity, the substance, it is called dravya. So in today's class, we will go through the types of dravya. You can see here a classification that has been used. Dravya can be divided into two types, jada and ajada. In Tattva Mukta Kalapa, Swami Deshika talks about the different constituents of Tattva. Dravya Dravya Prabhedanmitam Ubhayavidam तद्विदस्तत्त्वमाहुः द्रव्यं द्वेधा विभक्तं जडमजडमिति प्राच्यमव्यक्तकालौ अन्तं प्रत्यक्पराच्च प्रथममुभयथा तत्र जीवेशभेदात् नित्याभूतिर्मतिश्चेत्यपरमिह जडामादिमां केचिदाहुः. Sorry. So, Swami Deshika has talked about Dravya and Adravya. Okay, under Dravya, what is there? Jada and Ajada. In this manner, he is going on. Now, what is Jada? We have seen before. Jada is Achit. It is non-living. Correct? But let us look at some technical definitions. Dravya is defined as that entity which has the ability to change. Adravya is a property of Dravya, or it is basically a non-Dravya. Dravya has the nature and ability to change. Okay. Now this Dravya is of two types. One type is Jada. What is Jada? We said Jada means non-living. Is there a better way to understand what is non-living? Yes. Jada is there means what? I am perceiving something there. Correct? Jada is something whose existence could be known only by some other knowledge. You cannot know about it if you are that Jada, because Jada does not have knowledge. As it lacks knowledge by itself, it can be known only through some other knowledge. This is the fundamental property of a jada. So we define it that way. Jada is something that is perceived only through another knowledge. The knowledge of a different entity is required. What kind of entity should that be? That entity should be an ajada. You need an ajada to identify jada because only ajada would have jnana. Now, jada, we have talked about it. What is ajada? Ajada is something that is not jada, right? In our context, that which is not something that can be known only through a different knowledge. So, ajada can be defined as something that has the nature of being Swayam Prakasha. It is able to highlight itself. It is something that can know about its existence by itself, right? I am an ajada. You are an ajada. I could be known by your jnana. Yes, but I could also be known through my jnana. When I exist, I know myself that I exist, right? The knowledge of my existence is not necessarily dependent on a second entity that is different from me. Therefore, ajada is defined as that which has the ability to perceive its own existence, to be highlighted by itself. Okay, so what are the types of jada? Some acharyas say jada is of two types, avyakta and kala. These people would call Nitya Vibhuti as an ajada that falls under parak along with jnana. There are some other acharyas who say jada is of three types, avyakta, kala, and Nitya Vibhuti. Is this sounding similar to something that we had learned before? Yes, we had learned that Achit can be classified into three. When we said they could be classified into three, what were the three? We said Prakriti, Kala, and Shuddha Sattva. That is exactly what we are trying to say here as well. So, Avyakta is referring to that Prakriti, which has all the three gunas, right? Prakriti is a combination of Sattva guna, Rajo guna, and Tamo guna. From that Prakriti, so many things came, right? Mahat, Ahankara, and then all the bhutas, tanmatras, all of them came, right? We know about that. So all of them would fall under avyakta or prakriti. The second type, if we want to understand, that is going to be kala. Kala refers to time. Units of time are used to measure it. Like we have Uttarayana, Dakshinayana, or we have a Samvatsara, right? We are having a system of 60 years. After that, the 61st year is called by the same name as the first year. So we say Prabhavadi Shashti Samvatsaranam Madhye. What is that Prabhavadi? The first year among the 60 is called Prabhava. In that way, the Samvatsaras are calculated. So when you are trying to measure Jada is of three types we said. Avyakta. This Avyakta is itself of many types because of the nature of Prakriti, right? We saw how Mula Prakriti got modified into so many other different types of manifestations. You might not necessarily be able to measure it. If you want to measure it, you will have to measure it in terms of something. I'll give you an example. Under Avyakta, you would get Akasha, you would get Vayu, you would get Agni, you would get Apa, you would get Prithvi, like the Panchabhutas that we talk about. You would get all of them under Avyakta. Now, how do you measure Akasha? Space. How do you measure it? Let us say one person says it's quite easy to measure space. Space is measured in terms of volume. What is volume? You have an x-axis, y-axis, z-axis. You have length, breadth, height. Those three are enough to measure space. Okay. If you are going to say that space could be measured in this way, how are you going to measure Agni? Can Agni be measured using volume? It cannot. If you are to take the meaning of Agni as heat, then maybe you could use the units for temperature, Celsius, Fahrenheit, Kelvin. You could use those kinds of units. So, when it comes to measurement, Avyakta is such that you can't measure all of them using the same unit. Each one has to be measured in a different way. Can you measure water using space? We normally do that, right? We measure water in liters, milliliters, and so on. Liter is a unit of volume. But can we always measure it only by using volume? No. So, if you take Vayu, what about Vayu? How would you measure Vayu? It becomes a little tricky. Why? Because if you are going to measure just the space, length, breadth, and height, what you would have there is Akasha. It is inside of that Akasha that there is Vayu. How would you measure Vayu? You cannot necessarily measure it using volume because there is something called density. Pranavayu, so much of it could be compressed and kept it in a cylinder. You would call it oxygen cylinder. Maybe it is not compressed like what you have in the atmosphere. So volume becomes insufficient in that regard. So what we should learn is that avyakta can be measured only after further analyzing which kind of avyakta it is. If you are just given that something is avyakta, you cannot measure it immediately. The second is kala. Kala can be measured, right? There are units for time. How do you get units for time? By finding the differences between instances of time. That happens. Let us come to Nitya Vibhuti, or let us wait, because some people have said, some great people have said that Nitya Vibhuti is something that should not be kept under Jada. It should be kept under Parak, which is Ajada. Ajada, that is of the type of Parak, that is where it should be. Okay, so let us try to then understand Ajada. Ajada simply means that which is not Jada. How did we define Jada? We defined Jada as something whose existence would be known or which would be highlighted, whose existence and properties would be highlighted only through a different knowledge. What about Ajada? Ajada is something that could be highlighted, whose existence and properties could be highlighted by itself. Now, this Ajada is classified into two types, pratyak and parak. Does the word pratyak itself imply a form of ajada? No. Remember, if you say kala, the word kala is a noun that naturally refers to a type of jada. But if you say pratyak, it does not necessarily refer to ajada. So we are here classifying, we are talking about ajada that is of the type of pratyak. Okay. Now this pratyak, what does it mean? Pratyak is something that has the ability to get knowledge of itself. If you can get knowledge of yourself, you are pratyak type of ajada. That is the opposite of jada, right? What did we say for jada? Jada is something that cannot, that can be highlighted only by some outside knowledge. So naturally, every ajada should be highlightable by self-knowledge. Is it not so? And we are defining pratyak as something that is able to get knowledge about itself. So what is the big deal? How could there even be another category? Every ajada has to be of the pratyak type, right? Before answering this question, let us look at the types of ajadas that fall under this category. We talked about the ability to get knowledge about itself. There is only one type of entity that can get knowledge about itself. That is called Atma. That is called Atma. And as per Vishishtadvaitha, this Atma is of two different types, Jivatma and Paramatma. Therefore, Pratyak is classified into two. One is Jivatma and one is Paramatma. Jivatma is in short called as Jiva. Jivatma is Jiva at the end of the day. And Paramatma, the supreme sentient being, is addressed as Ishvara, as he is the controller of this entire thing. If you look at this chart, Ishvara is somewhere, we said Tattva, under Tattva there is Dravya, under Dravya there is Ajada, under Ajada there is Pratyak, under Pratyak there is Ishvara. We are representing him that way. In reality, he is the one controlling the entire chart. Everything is being controlled by him. Now, this is just a way of classifying. It does not imply that the superset is superior. Okay. Remember, Ishvara has all the Jada and Ajada as his Sharira. He has everything that exists as his Sharira. Sharire tava pashyami jagat sarvam idam prabho, said Kashyapa Maharshi. So, Ishvara is the one who possesses everything. Okay, so Pratyak simply means Atma. That Atma could be Jivatma or Paramatma. Is there a type of Ajada that exists which is not the Atman? Could there be such a kind? Remember previously when we learned about Tattva Traya, we said one Tattva is Ajada. Sorry, one Tattva is Jada. We called it Achit. Then the other two Tattvas were simply Jivatma and Paramatma, Chit and Ishvara. But here in this classification, we are seeing Jada has come, Jiva has come, Ishvara has come. But there is something more. What is that? That is Parak. What is Parak? It is the opposite of Pratyak. Okay, what is Pratyak again? Pratyak is something that could get knowledge about itself. Okay, so what is Parak? Parak is something that cannot be known to itself. Knowledge about something that falls under Parak can be obtained only to some other entity. This implies that Atma can never be Parak. Atma has the ability to know about itself. The Ajada that falls under Parak is something that can never know itself. Information about it can be obtained only by others. Then how is it different from Jada? Think about it. Consider a stone, a small piece of granite stone. This piece of granite will fall under Jada of Avyakta category because there is Jada, it is non-living. It is Avyakta, it is a product of Prakriti, right? How do you get the stone? The stone is predominantly Prithvi. Prithvi is a product of Mula Prakriti. So it will fall under Avyakta category. So a stone is Jada. But why did we call it Jada? We did not call it Jada because it cannot have knowledge. We called it Jada very smartly. We called it Jada by saying that it can be highlighted only by another knowledge. See how the definition is going. Jada can be highlighted. The existence of a Jada can be highlighted to us. For example, there is a stone in front of me. I look at it. Its existence is highlighted to me. By what? Not by the Jada, but by the knowledge that I possess. By processing information that comes through the I. So, Jada is something that can be identified only through some other knowledge. Ajada is not like that. Ajada is something that has the ability to highlight. It has the ability to highlight by itself. Okay. So Jada never highlights. Ajada highlights. Is that so? Let us consider fire. Fire falls under Jada. Can fire not highlight itself? It cannot. The existence of fire is not known to fire. The existence of fire is not known to other entities also, simply because of the properties of fire. Yes, the fire is there. It has specific properties from which you can identify it as fire, but those properties need to be perceived. I need to have eyes to be able to see the fire. I need to have a mind that is able to identify it as fire. Therefore, a fire can get identified as fire only by something that is not fire. And fire is not something that shows, that highlights its own existence. Every entity has specific properties. Fire also has specific properties. Just because it gives light, we should not assume that the fire is something that could be highlighted by its own knowledge. It gives light, but it does not possess knowledge. It does not possess knowledge and it cannot process knowledge. So, what possesses knowledge and also processes knowledge, that would be the Atma, Ajada, Pratyak, Jivatma, and Paramatma. They possess knowledge and can process knowledge as well. Remember, this is very important. Why am I saying this way? Because in Advaita, if you see the Paramarthika Satya, there is just one Brahman, one Atma, that is attributeless, that is Nirguna. Being attributeless, although it is of the Swarupa of Jnana, it will not possess Jnatrutva. It would not have the ability to know because it is Nirguna. So, Atma in the most real sense, as per Advaita, is something that cannot highlight itself and something that cannot process knowledge. But here, of course, there is no knowledge to be processed. That should also be said in the case of Advaita. But here, there is knowledge to be processed. And the Pratyak category is what is able to possess knowledge and also process knowledge. So how did we define Pratyak? We said it is something that can get knowledge about itself. A fire cannot get knowledge about itself, but Jivatma can, Paramatma can. So Pratyak is something that is able to obtain the knowledge about itself. Fire cannot receive information about itself. Okay. The other type, apart from Pratyak, what is it? It is Parak. What falls under Parak? What falls under Parak is Jnana. How is Parak defined? Parak is something that cannot be perceived by itself. Knowledge about that can only be obtained by some other entity. Jnana, by nature, possesses knowledge, right? Jnana is jnana, jnana is knowledge. But knowledge cannot know itself. Knowledge cannot know itself. So if it is made up of jnana, there is no guarantee that it would have jnatritva. So in this case, where it is anatma, it is not jivatma and it is not paramatma. It is just knowledge. This knowledge cannot know itself. It requires some other entity. This is very important. So, about Parak, the information could be known only by some other entity. We said the same thing for Jada as well, right? Yes, but Parak could contain Jnana. Jada would not contain Jnana inside. That is the difference between the two. Dravya, let us come back. Dravya is something that has the ability to change. As an example, you take clay. Clay changes into a pot, right? Clay that was just on the ground can change into pot. Thread can become cloth. So, clay, cloth, thread, cloth, pot, all of these are called dravyas. Among the Atma, what is the change that the Atma experiences? We said Dravya is something that has the ability to change. What change does Jivatma undergo? What change does Paramatma undergo? Is there any change at all? Yes, there is change. Through Jnana, there is change. There is Sankocha and Vikasa of Dharmabhuta Jnana in the Jivatma. We have seen about Dharmabhuta Jnana in detail in previous classes. We are not going to repeat that. But our point is that Jiva can be different or can change from itself through knowledge. So, Jivatma has to be considered as a Dravya. Paramatma, there is no need to question. He is obviously a Dravya. Okay, in what way does Paramatma change? Does he really get any knowledge? No, he is supposed to be just the same, right? He doesn't get anything. Yet, he performs all the Leelas. He performs all the Leelas. He is not a Jada and he has knowledge about himself. Therefore, he has to fall under only that particular category, Pratyak. There is no other possibility in the case of Ishvara. So, we should understand that. Prakriti, Kala, Jiva, Ishvara, Nitya Vibhuti. By Nitya Vibhuti, I am referring to Shuddha Sattva. Vaikuntha is called Nitya Vibhuti. So, Prakriti, Kala, Jiva, Ishvara, Nitya Vibhuti, Jnana, these are the 6 types of Dravya. Whatever you see at the end, right? Avyakta, Kala, Nitya Vibhuti, Jiva, Ishvara, Jnana. These are the 6 types of Dravya. Now, if we know that these 6 are the Dravya, then we understand that Dravya is classified into 6 different ways, not for fun, but for a very valid reason. Now, let us try to understand the reason behind this classification. And before that, let us try to understand Jnana. Jnana, it has Prakashatva, right? It is knowledge. Jada doesn't contain that knowledge, but Jnana is literally knowledge. Yet, knowledge cannot know itself. It has knowledge, but it cannot know itself. Jada does not have knowledge. Jnana has knowledge, but cannot know itself. Atma has knowledge and can know itself. Does it have knowledge all the time? Does Jivatma possess some knowledge or the other all the time? How do we explain it? That is why we say Jnana itself can be classified into 2. Dharma Bhuta Jnana and Dharmic Jnana. Knowledge of the existence of the self is going to be there in every existing entity. And therefore, the Atma has knowledge of the existence of the self. I know that I exist. I don't need you to tell me that I exist. I know that I exist, right? We know it naturally. So in that case, we have dharmic jnana. So Atma is something that possesses knowledge, can receive knowledge, can transmit knowledge, can do various things. Knowledge by itself cannot. This is very important. Why? There are some people who made a statement. Once upon a time, in the previous Kali Yuga, to a Brahmin family, Vishnu was born. Lord Vishnu took the Buddha avatar. Contrary to what people might be telling today, we do not believe that the Buddha from 2000 years ago is the same as Bhagavan's Avatara Buddha. The reason is that if we look at Srimad Bhagavatam, the family into which he was born, the place where he existed, all of that is different from what the Buddhists are telling from for Siddhartha Gautama, who lived 2000 years back. So there is a Bhagavan's Avatara Buddha. That Buddha, he taught something called Sarvashunyavada. He had four prominent disciples. After listening to his statements, all of them started thinking. Each one of the four interpreted the teaching of Buddhavatara in a different way. This gave birth to four different schools: Sautrantika, Vaibhashika, Yogachara, and Madhyamika. These four ancient schools are discussed by Vedavyasa. They are discussed by Adi Shankaracharya, Ramanujacharya, everybody. They are discussed in our scriptures, and we should not misunderstand these as post Gautama Buddha, post like a product of just the last 2000 years. We shouldn't assume that way. These had the mention of Buddha even 2000 years ago, but that was a different Buddha. We should remember that. We should not get confused. Okay, we said there were four disciples of Adi Buddha. They each interpreted in a different way and ended up creating four different schools of Buddhism. One of those schools of Buddhism is Yogachara. Madhyamika school says nothing exists at all. Yogachara does not say that. The Yogacharas are called Jnanamatra Astitvavadina. Bhagavad Ramanuja, in his Shri Bhashyam, he refers to the Yogacharas as Jnanamatra Astitvavadina. Accept the Astitvam of only Jnana. They accept the existence of only Jnana. They do not accept the existence of Jnani. We, on the other hand, we acknowledge the existence of Jnana, but we say Jnana can be possessed only if there is a Jnani to possess it. Knowledge can be possessed or even processed only by an entity who has those specific capabilities. So, there is Jnana and there is Jnani. Without the Jnani, Jnana cannot exist. In this regard, Bhagavad Ramanuja gives an example. Ghatam aham janami. I know the pot. Let us say I don't exist. Let us say the pot also does not exist. How can the knowledge about the pot, like its size, its color, how much it is filled with water and so on, how could the knowledge about the pot exist if there is no sentient being to possess that knowledge? It is an impossibility. So, we should understand that Bhagavad Ramanuja, he very beautifully says, the entire world would laugh if you say, I don't exist, the pot doesn't exist, but knowledge about the pot exists. How is it making any sense at all? It makes no sense. But if we classify in this way, you have Pratyak. Under Pratyak, you have only Jiva. You have Jivatma and Paramatma. Under Parak, you have Jnana. Jnana could be possessed by the Jnani, hence solved, right? It gets sorted out. No problem there. Okay. One last thing that we should understand. This Nitya Vibhuti, how are some people able to call it Ajada? Nitya Vibhuti is Shuddha Sattva. Some people said Shuddha Sattva should not be classified along with Jada. it should be classified as Ajada with the Parak category. So, Shuddha Sattva is just like Jnana, according to them. Shuddha Sattva has the ability to highlight itself, but it cannot be seen. But does Shuddha Sattva really have the ability to highlight itself? Who does it highlight itself to? Those kinds of questions would start arising. And these questions would lead to confusion. So, Shuddha Sattva, can you call it as a type of knowledge? No. It is not a type of jnana. But just like jnana, it falls under parak as per those acharyas. So it is very special, Shuddha Sattva, according to them. Shuddha Sattva also has knowledge of itself. It doesn't have knowledge of itself. It gives knowledge, but it cannot possess or process that knowledge of itself. So this should be understood by us. If you have understood this fully, please let me know. If you have any doubt, please feel free to ask. Full theory today. Quite dry, I must say. But this is necessary for us. We need to reason it out logically. We have to say, Yogachara says only knowledge exists. How is that possible? It is an impossibility. It is a logical impossibility. To possess a guna, you need guni, right? So to possess jnana, you need a jnani. You need a person who has the ability to possess knowledge. So if not for Jiva and Ishvara, jnana would be useless. Nitya Vibhuti would be useless. Kala would be useless. Avyakta would be useless. If there is any use, if there is any purpose of existence for any of them, it is only because of Jivatma and Ishvara. So is that clear? Let me know if you have any doubt or if you want me to repeat anything. We will look at it at further depth in the next class. We are yet to look at Adravya. Remember that. We have looked only at Dravya so far. Adravya is also there. Okay, I don't see any question. So I'll conclude today's lecture here. श्रीवासराघव गुरोस्तनयं तस्य विद्यावाप्यभूतमतां विधानं वेदार्दिगुरुं करुणाकराक्षि कवितार्किकसिंहाय कल्याणगुणशालिने श्रीमते वेङ्कटेशाय वेदान्तगुरवे नमः. Thank you for attending.